There comes a moment in life when a person quietly realizes they are exhausted. Not tired from work, not tired from responsibilities, not even tired from problems. Exhausted from thinking, from replaying conversations that already ended, from worrying about bills that haven't arrived yet, from imagining disasters that may never happen, from carrying tomorrow on your back before today is even finished. And the strange part is this. Most people between 35 and 55 never say it out loud. They smile. They handle business. They take care of family. They show up for work. They answer messages. They pay the mortgage. They solve everyone else's emergencies. But deep inside, their mind never stops moving. Even during quiet moments. Even late at night. Even while sitting beside the people they love. Their body is present. Their mind is somewhere else. Somewhere in the future, somewhere in fear, somewhere in the endless loop of what if. What if the economy gets worse? What if my health changes? What if my children struggle? What if I made the wrong decision? What if I never reached the life I imagined? And slowly, without realizing it, worry becomes a lifestyle, not an occasional emotion, not a temporary phase, but a constant background noise, a quiet thief. Because worry does not always destroy life dramatically. Sometimes it steals life silently. It steals sleep. It steals joy. It steals presence. It steals confidence. It steals peace from moments that should have been beautiful. A father sits at dinner physically present, but mentally trapped inside financial fears. A woman finally reaches career success, yet cannot enjoy it because she is terrified of losing it. A man spends years preparing for problems that never arrive, while missing opportunities standing directly in front of him. This is the tragedy of modern life. People are surviving, but very few are truly living. And yet centuries ago, long before smartphones, long before non-stop news cycles, long before social media turned comparison into a daily addiction, ancient philosophers already understood this human struggle perfectly. The Stoics understood it. The Taoists understood it. The Buddhists understood it. Different cultures, different languages, different eras, yet they all arrived at the same truth. A peaceful life is not created by controlling everything around you. It is created by mastering what happens within you. Marcus Aurelius wrote those words while leading an empire during war and plague. Not from comfort, not from luxury, not from isolation. He understood something most people still fail to understand today. Your peace cannot depend on perfect circumstances, because perfect circumstances do not exist. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be change. There will always be unexpected problems. But there is a massive difference between experiencing challenges and becoming emotionally consumed by them. One is part of life. The other is self-created suffering. Right now, millions of people are carrying imaginary futures so heavily that they cannot even enjoy the life already in their hands. They postpone happiness. They postpone rest. They postpone peace. They tell themselves, "I'll relax when everything is under control. I'll enjoy life after this stressful period. I'll finally feel calm when I solve every problem." But life does not work that way. Because every solved problem is replaced by another. Every finished chapter opens a new one. Every season carries new uncertainty. If peace only comes after uncertainty disappears, peace never arrives. And maybe that is the biggest realization a person can have in middle adulthood. The goal is not to eliminate uncertainty. The goal is to stop allowing uncertainty to control your emotional state. That changes everything. Because when a person finally stops fighting every unknown future, something remarkable happens. Their mind clears. Their energy returns. Their relationships improve. Their decisions become sharper. Their confidence grows stronger. Not because life became easier, but because they stopped draining themselves mentally. And this is where life often begins to work out in ways that feel almost mysterious. Not magical, not lucky. Simply natural. A calm mind notices opportunities a fearful mind misses. A present person makes better decisions than an anxious one. Someone who trusts themselves moves with clarity while others freeze in overthinking. Worry scatters energy. Peace concentrates it. That is why two people can face the exact same challenge while experiencing completely different realities. One spirals into fear. The other quietly adapts. One sees uncertainty as danger. The other sees possibility. One becomes trapped inside imagined disasters. The other remains grounded in what is actually happening. And often, the second person succeeds not because they are smarter, luckier, or more talented, but because their mind is not constantly working against them. There is a reason older generations often say things like, "Most of the things I worried about never happened," because eventually life teaches everyone the same lesson. Fear exaggerates. Worry predicts disaster. Reality is usually far more manageable than the mind imagined. But many people learn this too late. They spend decades emotionally suffering through futures that never arrive. Think about how many nights were ruined over things that solved themselves. How many arguments started from assumptions that were never true? How many opportunities were missed because fear convinced someone not to act? How many dreams quietly died because uncertainty felt unbearable? This is why letting go matters. Not giving up, not becoming careless, not pretending problems do not exist. Letting go of the illusion that endless worrying protects you. Because it doesn't. Worry does not prevent pain. It only guarantees additional suffering. And perhaps nowhere is this lesson more important than for people entering the second half of life. By 35, 45, 55, people begin understanding time differently. They realize life is not endless. They realize stress accumulates. They realize relationships matter more than appearances. They realize peace is more valuable than constant achievement. Many people spend their younger years chasing success, then spend middle age trying to recover the peace they sacrificed to achieve it. But it does not have to be that way. You can still build. You can still grow. You can still pursue goals without destroying your inner life in the process. That is the deeper wisdom ancient philosophy tried to teach. Success without peace is another form of failure. A person can have money and still live in anxiety. A person can have status and still feel empty. A person can achieve everything externally while collapsing internally. Because the mind always follows you. And if your mind has become addicted to fear, no external achievement will finally satisfy it. That is why learning to release worry is not weakness. It is maturity. It is emotional intelligence. It is wisdom. It is self-respect. It is finally understanding that your nervous system was never designed to carry every possible future simultaneously. Nature itself teaches this. Trees do not panic through winter. Oceans do not resist the tide. The sun does not rush sunrise. Everything in nature moves with rhythm. Everything flows. Everything changes. Human beings suffer largely because they resist this truth. They demand certainty from an uncertain world. They demand permanence from temporary experiences. They demand control over things that were never theirs to control. And the tighter they grip life, the more anxious they become. It is like trying to hold water with a clenched fist. The harder you squeeze, the less remains. But when you loosen your grip, life often settles naturally. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming wise enough to recognize where your energy actually matters. You cannot control every outcome, but you can control your response. You cannot stop change, but you can stop resisting it. You cannot predict the future, but you can strengthen yourself for whatever arrives. That is real power. And maybe this is the year that finally changes for you. Maybe this is the year you stop carrying imaginary disasters. Maybe this is the year you stop needing constant validation. Maybe this is the year you stop comparing your timeline to everyone else's. Maybe this is the year you stop rehearsing failure before life even unfolds. Because the truth is, most people are far stronger than they think. They have already survived things they once believed would destroy them. They have already adapted to impossible seasons. They have already overcome losses, disappointments, heartbreaks, failures, and uncertainty. yet somehow they still doubt their ability to handle the future. Why? Because fear has a short memory. Fear forgets resilience. Fear ignores growth. Fear erases evidence of past survival. But wisdom remembers. Wisdom says, you have handled difficult seasons before. You will handle future ones too. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but capably. And that realization alone changes how a person walks through life. Instead of constantly bracing for impact, they begin trusting themselves. Instead of collapsing under uncertainty, they adapt. Instead of overthinking every possibility, they focus on the next right step. That is where peace begins. Not in certainty, but in trust. Trust that life can still surprise you positively. Trust that setbacks are not always endings. Trust that delays are not proof of failure. Trust that your value is not measured by external approval. Trust that peace is possible even before every problem is solved. And most importantly, trust that this present moment still contains life worth experiencing. Because one of the saddest things that happens to adults is this. They become so focused on surviving the future that they stop noticing the beauty already around them. The conversation with a loved one, the morning sunlight, the laughter of children, the comfort of an ordinary evening, the quiet victory of making it through another difficult season. These moments matter. In fact, they are life. Not the future version where everything is perfect. Not the fantasy where stress disappears forever. This, right here. And if worry steals your ability to experience these moments, then worry has already taken too much. So perhaps the real transformation in 2026 is not becoming someone new. Perhaps it is remembering who you were before fear became your default setting. Before overthinking dominated your mind. Before anxiety convinced you that peace must always wait. Because underneath the stress, underneath the pressure, underneath the endless mental noise, there is still a calmer version of you. A wiser version, a steadier version, a stronger version. Someone capable of handling uncertainty without panic. Someone capable of facing obstacles without collapsing. Someone capable of enjoying life while it is happening. That person already exists. The rest of this journey is simply learning how to return to them. The first step is understanding one life-changing distinction. There is a difference between concern and worry. Most people treat them as the same thing, but they are completely different forces. Concern is useful. Worry is exhausting. Concern says, there is a problem. Let me address it. Worry says, there is a problem. Let me emotionally torture myself about it for hours. Concern leads to action. Worry leads to paralysis. Concern improves life. Worry drains it. This distinction changes everything. A person concerned about health schedules a checkup, improves nutrition, exercises more consistently. A person trapped in worry spends nights scrolling symptoms online, imagining worst-case scenarios, stressing themselves into deeper exhaustion. One moves toward solutions. The other becomes consumed by fear. The same happens financially. Concern creates budgets, planning, preparation, discipline. Worry creates panic, avoidance, shame, and sleepless nights. And what makes this even more tragic is that worry often disguises itself as responsibility. People think, if I stop worrying, I'll become careless. But calm people are not careless. In fact, calm people often think more clearly. They make better decisions. They conserve energy. They respond instead of react. An anxious mind burns enormous energy without producing meaningful results. It is like revving a car engine endlessly while remaining parked. Lots of noise, lots of tension, no movement, and eventually, the engine burns out. This is why chronic worry damages not only emotional health, but physical health. The body was never meant to stay in constant survival mode. Stress hormones rise, sleep suffers, patience shortens, energy drops, relationships weaken, and over time, people begin feeling disconnected from themselves. Not because life defeated them, but because their mind never gave them rest. Ancient Stoicism approached this differently. The Stoics believe that much of human suffering comes from focusing on things outside our control. Other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, the past, unexpected outcomes. They recognize that trying to control the uncontrollable creates endless frustration. So they focused instead on one thing above all else. Response, not events. Response. Because while life is unpredictable, your character can still remain steady. This is why two people can experience the same setback while producing entirely different futures. One collapses emotionally, the other adapts. One becomes bitter, the other becomes wiser. One spends years replaying the pain, the other learns from it and moves forward. The event matters, but response matters more. And this realization becomes especially powerful in middle adulthood. By this stage in life, most people have already learned an important truth. Very little ever goes exactly according to plan. Careers change, relationships evolve, children grow, health shifts, dreams transform, unexpected chapters appear. Yet many people continue resisting reality instead of adapting to it. They fight change emotionally long after change has already arrived, and resistance creates additional suffering. This is why acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is clarity. It means recognizing reality as it is instead of wasting energy demanding it become something else. If a storm arrives, denying the storm changes nothing. The wise person prepares. The anxious person panics. And often the difference between those two responses determines the quality of an entire life. The truth is, uncertainty is not a temporary phase. It is life itself. No one receives guarantees. No one gets permanent security. No one knows exactly what comes next. The people who suffer most are often not the people with the hardest lives. They are the people who cannot emotionally tolerate uncertainty. They need constant reassurance, constant control, constant prediction. And because life cannot provide those things consistently, anxiety becomes their permanent companion. But something extraordinary happens when a person finally accepts uncertainty instead of fighting it. Fear loosens, not instantly, not completely, but gradually, because they stop demanding impossible guarantees from life. They stop needing every outcome to feel safe. They stop treating uncertainty as danger, and suddenly possibilities reappear. This matters deeply because almost everything meaningful in life requires uncertainty. Love requires uncertainty. Business requires uncertainty. Creativity requires uncertainty. Growth requires uncertainty. No major transformation arrives fully guaranteed. Every meaningful path contains risk. And yet the most beautiful parts of life often emerge from situations nobody could fully predict. The friendship that changed everything. The opportunity that appeared unexpectedly. The setback that redirected someone toward a better future. Life constantly rearranges itself in ways the human mind cannot fully anticipate. That is why excessive control often blocks growth. People become so afraid of discomfort that they avoid the exact experiences capable of transforming them. They stay in careers that drain them. They remain in unhealthy dynamics. They postpone dreams indefinitely, not because they lack ability, but because uncertainty feels intolerable. Yet courage has never meant the absence of fear. Courage means moving forward despite uncertainty. The ancient philosophers understood this clearly. A meaningful life is not built by waiting until fear disappears. It is built by acting wisely while fear exists. And ironically, action often reduces anxiety more effectively than endless thinking, because movement creates momentum. When people remain stuck in overthinking, their fears multiply. But when they begin taking practical steps, clarity grows. A conversation happens. A decision gets made. A problem becomes manageable. Action reconnects people to reality. Worry traps them inside imagination. This is especially important for adults who feel behind in life. Many people between 35 and 55 quietly carry enormous shame about timing. They compare themselves constantly. Someone else built wealth faster. Someone else found love earlier. Someone else appears more successful. Someone else seems happier. And social media intensifies this illusion. People compare their internal struggles to other people's carefully edited highlights. But comparison destroys peace because it creates an invisible race nobody can actually win. There will always be someone ahead in one area. Always someone younger. Always someone wealthier. Always someone more accomplished. If worth depends on comparison, peace becomes impossible. Ancient wisdom repeatedly warned against this. Not because ambition is wrong, but because identity built entirely on external measurement becomes unstable. A person who only values themselves through achievement will never feel complete. There will always be another target, another milestone, another comparison. This is why external validation becomes addictive. Compliments feel good temporarily. Recognition feels good temporarily. Success feels good temporarily. But if self-worth depends entirely on external approval, anxiety eventually follows. Because approval is unpredictable. People change. Opinions change. Trends change. And if someone's identity depends on applause, silence becomes terrifying. This is why mature confidence looks different. It is quieter, steadier, less performative. It comes from self-respect rather than constant attention. The older people become, the more they realize something important. Not everyone will understand your path, and that is okay. Some people will criticize decisions they never had the courage to make. Some people will misunderstand growth because it challenges their own comfort. Some people will project their fears onto your choices. You cannot build a meaningful life while trying to satisfy every opinion around you. Eventually, a person must decide, do I want approval or do I want peace? Because often those two things conflict. And the people who finally find emotional freedom are usually the people who stop performing for imaginary audiences. They stop constantly asking, what will people think? And start asking, what kind of life actually feels true to me? That question changes everything, because authenticity creates a different kind of confidence. Not loud confidence, not arrogant confidence, grounded confidence, the kind that does not collapse every time external circumstances shift. And this inner steadiness becomes even more powerful during difficult seasons, because challenges are unavoidable. No philosophy eliminates hardship. Loss still happens. Disappointment still happens. Unexpected pain still happens. But perspective changes how hardship is experienced. Ancient Stoicism taught that obstacles themselves can become pathways. This sounds abstract until life proves it personally. A job loss forces someone to reinvent themselves and eventually discover work they genuinely love. A painful breakup teaches boundaries that later create healthier relationships. Financial hardship develops discipline and resilience that future success depends upon. The obstacle itself becomes part of the transformation. This does not mean suffering is enjoyable. It means difficulty is often meaningful. And one of the greatest emotional shifts a person can make is this. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? They begin asking, what is this teaching me? That question turns pain into growth. Not immediately, not perfectly, but gradually. And people who adopt this mindset become remarkably resilient, because they stop seeing every setback as proof life is against them. They begin recognizing that challenge is part of development. Just as muscles strengthen through resistance, character strengthens through adversity. This is why many deeply wise people often carry difficult histories. Their strength was not created in comfort. It was forged through hardship. And perhaps one of the most liberating realizations in adulthood is understanding this. You do not need to fear every obstacle. You have already survived enough to know you are capable of adaptation. The mind forgets this constantly, but reality keeps proving it. People survive heartbreak. People survive failure. People survive uncertainty. People survive reinvention. And often they emerge wiser than before. Yet worry keeps convincing them they are fragile. This is why presence matters so deeply. Because worry lives almost entirely outside the present moment. It lives in imagined futures, projected disasters, mental rehearsals. Meanwhile, life itself keeps happening now, and many adults slowly lose the ability to fully experience ordinary moments because their attention is permanently trapped elsewhere. This is one of the hidden costs of chronic anxiety. It disconnects people from their actual lives. Someone drinks coffee without tasting it. Someone drives home without remembering the drive. Someone listens without truly hearing. Someone spends years planning future happiness while missing present reality. Ancient mindfulness practices addressed this directly, not as spiritual escape, but as practical wisdom. Presence sharpens awareness. Presence calms the nervous system. Presence reconnects people to reality. And reality is often far less frightening than the stories fear creates. Right now, in this exact moment, most people are breathing. Most people are physically safe. Most people are capable of taking one next step. But anxiety expands beyond this moment. It drags in tomorrow, next year, worst-case scenarios. And suddenly the mind becomes overwhelmed carrying futures that do not yet exist. Presence interrupts this. Presence says, return here, return now, return to what is real. This simple shift changes emotional experience dramatically, not because problems disappear, but because the nervous system stops trying to survive imaginary timelines simultaneously. This is why people often feel calmer in nature. Nature exists fully in the present. The ocean is not anxious about tomorrow. Birds are not replaying yesterday. Rain does not compare itself to sunlight. Everything simply exists. And human beings instinctively feel restored around that energy. Because beneath modern stress, the human nervous system still longs for simplicity, still longs for quiet, still longs for presence, still longs for enoughness. Yet modern culture constantly pushes the opposite direction. More comparison, more stimulation, more urgency, more fear. People wake up checking bad news, spend the day multitasking, scroll endlessly at night. Their mind never rests. And eventually, they begin confusing anxiety with productivity. But constant mental tension is not strength. It is exhaustion disguised as responsibility. Real strength includes calm. Real maturity includes emotional regulation. Real wisdom includes knowing when to stop carrying what no longer serves you. And maybe this becomes the greatest lesson of all. Peace is not found at the end of perfect circumstances. Peace is practiced, daily, quietly, repeatedly, through perspective, through boundaries, through presence, through letting go, not once, again and again, because the human mind naturally drifts toward fear. Ancient philosophy never denied this. It trained for it. The Stoics journaled daily. Buddhist monks practiced mindfulness daily. Taoist teachers practiced surrender daily. Why? Because peace requires maintenance. Just like physical health requires consistent care, mental clarity requires consistent practice. And this is where transformation truly begins. Not in dramatic overnight change, but in small repeated decisions. Choosing not to spiral mentally, choosing to return to the present, choosing to release comparison, choosing to trust yourself, choosing to focus on what can actually be controlled. Over time, these choices reshape an entire life. A calmer person sleeps differently, speaks differently, makes decisions differently, builds relationships differently. Their energy changes, and people notice, not because they became perfect, but because they stopped fighting themselves constantly. This is especially important in the second half of life, because eventually people realize something heartbreaking. Time matters. Years pass quickly. Children grow quickly. Parents age quickly. Opportunities change quickly. And one day people look back wondering how much life was spent worrying instead of living. That realization can either create regret or wisdom. Wisdom says, there is still time. Time to slow down. Time to reconnect. Time to become emotionally healthier. Time to stop living in permanent fear. Time to enjoy ordinary moments again. Because peace is not reserved for people with perfect lives. It belongs to people who learn how to relate to life differently. And perhaps that is what finally changes everything. Not the external world, but the internal relationship with it. A person who trusts themselves walks differently through uncertainty. A person who releases constant comparison experiences freedom. A person who stops rehearsing disaster rediscovers joy. A person who practices presence reconnects with life. And gradually things begin improving. Not because the universe suddenly became easier, but because the person themselves became steadier. That steadiness changes decisions. Decisions change behavior. Behavior changes outcomes. This is the hidden truth behind why life often begins working out when people finally let go. Letting go creates space. Space for clarity. Space for creativity. Space for intuition. Space for better choices. Fear crowds all of that out. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this. You are not your thoughts. You are not every fear your mind creates. You are not every catastrophic scenario anxiety invents. You are not every insecurity comparison whispers. Thoughts happen, but wisdom determines which thoughts deserve belief. A mature mind learns to observe fear without automatically obeying it. This is emotional freedom, not the absence of negative thoughts, but the ability to avoid becoming controlled by them. And once someone develops this ability, life changes profoundly, because suddenly they stop reacting impulsively to every emotion. They pause, they breathe, they choose. That pause alone can save relationships, save careers, save health, save years of unnecessary suffering. The ancient philosophers trained this relentlessly, not because they were emotionless, but because they understood unchecked emotion can destroy judgment. A fearful mind exaggerates danger. An angry mind exaggerates offense. An insecure mind exaggerates rejection. Perspective restores balance. And one perspective shift stands above almost all others. Most problems are temporary. Not all, but most. Feelings change. Circumstances change. People change. Seasons change. Yet anxious minds often interpret temporary experiences as permanent disasters. A difficult month becomes, my whole life is falling apart. One rejection becomes, I'll never succeed. One setback becomes, it's too late for me. But reality is rarely that absolute. Human beings are adaptive, and many breakthroughs arrive shortly after periods that once felt hopeless. This is another reason patience matters. Not passive waiting, steady patience. The kind rooted in understanding that meaningful things often require time. Healing requires time. Trust requires time. Mastery requires time. Reinvention requires time. Modern culture glorifies speed, but nature develops slowly. A tree does not become strong overnight. Neither does a human being. The strongest people are usually not the people who rushed life. They are the people who endured it wisely, who stayed grounded through uncertainty, who kept moving through setbacks, who remained open despite disappointment. And perhaps this is the greatest emotional shift available in adulthood, replacing fear with trust. Not blind trust, not naive optimism. Earned trust. Trust built from surviving previous storms. Trust built from experience. Trust built from recognizing that life has carried you through difficult seasons before. Because often the person you are becoming requires the exact experiences you are resisting. The challenge develops patience. The delay develops resilience. The uncertainty develops courage. And one day, looking backward, many people realize something astonishing. The seasons they feared most shaped them most deeply. Not because suffering itself was good, but because growth emerged through it. This realization softens resistance. People stop demanding that life always feel comfortable. They begin asking instead, how do I meet life wisely? That question changes everything. Because wisdom is not avoiding every challenge. Wisdom is learning how to move through challenges without losing yourself. And that may be the real purpose of all this ancient philosophy. Not to make people passive, not to make people detached, but to help them remain internally steady inside an unpredictable world. A steady person still feels emotion, still experiences grief, still experiences stress, but they are not constantly drowning in it. They recover faster, adapt faster, return to center faster. That is emotional mastery, and it becomes increasingly valuable with age, because life becomes too precious to waste entirely inside fear. At some point, people realize, I do not want to spend the next decade living the same anxious patterns. I do not want to keep postponing peace. I do not want to keep missing the present moment. I do not want to keep carrying imaginary futures every day. That realization itself is powerful, because awareness begins transformation. And perhaps right now, while listening to these words, something inside you already knows this is true. You are tired of overthinking, tired of carrying pressure constantly, tired of mentally rehearsing problems. You want something different, not perfection, not fantasy, peace, steadier mornings, quieter thoughts, more presence, more trust. And the beautiful thing is this, that life is still available. No matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how long anxiety has dominated your thinking, the mind can change, patterns can change, perspective can change, but only if practiced, not occasionally, consistently. This is why wisdom traditions emphasize daily discipline, morning reflection, mindfulness, journaling, gratitude, intentional silence. Not because these practices are trendy, because they retrain attention, and attention shapes experience. Whatever constantly holds your attention eventually shapes your emotional life. If attention stays trapped in fear, anxiety grows. If attention repeatedly returns to presence, gratitude, clarity, and perspective, peace grows. Slowly, quietly, but genuinely. And maybe the most important practice of all is self-compassion, because many adults carry harsh inner voices, voices shaped by criticism, pressure, comparison, or unrealistic expectations. They speak to themselves more cruelly than they would ever speak to someone they love. Every mistake becomes proof of inadequacy. Every setback becomes personal failure. But growth cannot thrive in constant self-attack. Even ancient philosophers understood this. They encouraged discipline, but not self-hatred. There is a difference. A wise person takes responsibility without destroying themselves emotionally. They acknowledge mistakes, learn, adjust, move forward, without turning every imperfection into identity. This matters deeply because healing requires safety, and if your own mind never feels safe, peace becomes difficult. That is why learning to speak to yourself differently changes emotional experience profoundly. Instead of, I'm failing, you begin saying, I'm learning. Instead of, it's too late, you begin saying, there is still time. Instead of, everything is falling apart, you begin saying, this is difficult, but I can handle it. These are not empty affirmations. They are emotional recalibrations. They return perspective where fear created distortion, and perspective changes behavior. A calmer person thinks more clearly. A clearer person makes wiser decisions. Wiser decisions create better futures. Again and again, life improves not through panic, but through steadiness. This is why the most powerful people are often not the loudest. They are the most grounded. They conserve energy. They think before reacting. They move intentionally. And perhaps this kind of quiet strength is exactly what modern life desperately needs. Not more stimulation, not more outrage, not more comparison, more clarity, more wisdom, more emotional stability. Because a peaceful person affects everyone around them. Children feel safer, relationships deepen, conversations soften, decisions improve, peace spreads, just like anxiety spreads. This means your inner work matters not only for you, but for everyone connected to you. A calmer parent changes a family. A calmer leader changes a workplace. A calmer partner changes a relationship. And all of this begins internally, with awareness, with perspective, with practice. No one becomes peaceful accidentally. It is cultivated. And yes, there will still be difficult days. Days when fear returns. Days when uncertainty feels heavy. Days when overthinking resurfaces. That does not mean failure. It means being human. The goal is not permanent perfection. The goal is faster recovery. Returning to center more quickly. Returning to presence more quickly. Returning to trust more quickly. That is growth. And over time, these returns become easier. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you become more emotionally capable. Eventually, a quiet confidence develops. Not confidence that nothing bad will ever happen. Confidence that whatever happens, you will face it. That confidence changes everything. It allows a person to relax into life instead of constantly bracing against it. And strangely enough, this is often when opportunities finally begin appearing. Because fear narrows perception, peace expands it. An anxious mind sees danger everywhere. A grounded mind notices possibility. One stays frozen, the other moves. One keeps replaying imaginary disasters. The other builds reality. This is why letting go is not losing control. It is releasing the illusion of control so you can finally focus on what truly matters. Your mindset, your actions, your character, your presence. Those things shape life far more powerfully than endless worry ever will. And maybe right now you are realizing something. The future you want may not require more fear. It may require less. Less overthinking, less comparison, less emotional resistance, more trust, more presence, more courage. Because ultimately, life responds differently to people who are internally aligned. Not perfect, aligned. People who stop sabotaging themselves mentally. People who stop delaying joy. People who stop demanding certainty before taking action. Those people move differently. And over time, their entire life reflects that shift. This is why so many older, wiser people eventually simplify. Not because they lost ambition, because they finally learned what truly matters. Peace matters. Health matters. Meaningful relationships matter. Presence matters. And perhaps this is the final realization. You do not need to wait until everything is solved before allowing yourself peace. You do not need a perfect bank account, a perfect body, a perfect relationship, a perfect future. Peace begins when you stop arguing with reality constantly, when you stop postponing life, when you stop rehearsing disaster, when you stop needing every answer immediately. Because life itself has always been uncertain. And yet, despite that uncertainty, beautiful things continue happening every day. People heal, people reconnect, people rebuild, people begin again. You can too, not by becoming someone else, but by finally releasing the patterns that keep pulling you away from yourself. The fear, the overthinking, the endless mental noise. Underneath all of that, there is still clarity, still strength, still peace. And maybe this year is not about controlling everything. Maybe it is about trusting yourself enough to stop carrying what no longer belongs in your mind. Because the truth is, life has never required perfection from you, only participation. To show up, to stay present, to keep moving, to keep learning, to keep living. And perhaps when you finally stop gripping life so tightly, you will discover something surprising. Most of what you feared was never standing in your way. The fear itself was. And the moment you release it, even slightly, life begins opening again. Quietly, naturally, one breath, one decision, one present moment at a time. That is how peace returns. That is how clarity returns. And sometimes, that is exactly when everything finally starts working out.